How good is a chaos-based elemental ailment stacking spell build in 0.4? The answer, pretty good, but with an obvious power ceiling. This limitation is unfortunately baked into the game design as of 0.4. This is Kenny17, and we have a follow-up on the previous Maximizing Your Chaos Damage video, wherein we now explore a similar concept on a spell-based build. TLDR, pure Chaos Ailment stacking can comfortably clear T16 juice maps and requires 30 to 40 seconds for T3 Pinnacle or Citadel clears while managing full boss mechanics. The power ceiling exists because we do not invest into crit, as it will dominate and homogenize the build into something very similar to most other spell builds out there. We break this video into two parts. First, we discuss how 0.4 has limited support for a Chaos spell build archetype, especially if we do not lean into crit. To contextualize, we examine what makes crit so dominant for spell builds overall, and damage is only half the story, as well as examining the lack of Chaos spell support compared to its elemental counterpart. Second, I will showcase two demo builds using only Chaos for ailment stacking without crit to demonstrate how far we can go if we stubbornly want to lean into this archetype. One good news is that we don't need any lineage support gems to stack up to 4 elemental ailments, even while running Original Sin. Overall, I hope this video shows the limited state of Chaos spell build in 0.4, with crit and LE damage being the much more efficient alternative, as well as showing elements of interest in the demo build section for you to incorporate into your own builds. Two quick disclaimers. One, I have about 800 hours into POE2, and this is my first attempt at a serious spellcaster build. So if any of the conclusions here are due to my own limitations, rather than that of the game, please let me know how I can further improve. 2, the popular Essence String and Contagion setup for Chaos builds is not discussed in the context of this video, as we are interested in seeing if other spell-based builds are still viable. Jumping right in, let's start with why crit is so dominant in spell-based builds, even more so than attack-based builds. There are two reasons. Reason number 1, far superior base crit chance. As of 0.4, the base crit chance of quarterstaffs is about 10%, while that of spears, bows, crossbows, and maces all hovering about 5%, with some exceptions going up to 7 to 8%. This is a far cry from elemental spell skills ranging from 7, 9, and up to 13% for selected code spells. This difference intrinsically lowers the barrier to build into crit for spells and increases the crit power ceiling for spells overall. Gearing does not change the story. Attack gears have suffix to add to base crit, while wands, staffs, and focus have suffix for crit chance increase. Overall, spell gears still win out. The reason is simple. Given a much lower crit base, you need the weapon suffix simply to hit parity on base crit to that of a spell. This means while you're spending tens if not mores of diff trying to bring your attack crit on parity with a spell skill, you're already scaling way past that on the spell side with crit chance increase on wands, staffs, and focus. If you do not think a few percentage difference of base crit is important, know that out of the entire passive tree, there's exactly one node that adds 1% to base crit for attacks only. Towards the end game, assume you've invested about 300% of increase to crit chance, then comparing a crit base of 7% to 10% results in an overall 28% versus 40% chance to crit. Comparing this against a spell with an innate crit chance of 13%, you end up getting a 52% chance to crit. As you can see, a few percentage point difference in base crit significantly affects your final crit chance, and the more investment, the more obvious the difference. Reason number 2, crit enables the best automation in the game. To further stress the dominant state of crit for spell builds, we have a spell-exclusive automation engine, Cast on Crit or COC. Simply put, the more crit you perform, the more energy you'll gain, where upon a threshold, will trigger any spell you've socketed into the skill automatically. COC is the best in-class cast on skill, in the sense that crit does not have cooldown, meaning you can crit during mapping or bossing constantly without delay for energy gain. Comparing COC with a few other cast on skills, let's start with Cast on Elemental Ailment. COEA can gain energy by refreshing Shock and Ignite, but not freeze, simply because you cannot freeze a monster that's already frozen. For Shock, you do not get bonus energy gain with increased damage unlike COC, and for Ignite, you'll most likely gain less energy than crit simply because on average, a hit that ignites will probably do less damage than a hit that crits. All these ailment mechanics contribute to a lower energy gain rate than COC. Then we move on to comparing against cast on minion death. Your energy gain here is limited by your revive timer. There is a weapon swap trick with Wolfpack that I'll show later which essentially bypasses this cooldown requirement, but overall it's still inferior to COC, in the sense that we're still missing out on crit damage, and that this interaction is likely not intended and might get removed in a later patch. Lastly, we compare COC against cast on dodge. So putting everything together, how insane can COC actually be? A good example is an arc build from Operator Utter, great channel by the way, along with Kia Feng, links in the description, where via COC, he effectively triggers infused arc cast once every 0.17 seconds, or put it another way, automates more than 5 casts of infused arc per second. This melts the screen instantaneously. Moving away from crit, the current state of 0.4 spell archetype provides many more scaling packages for elemental damage than its chaos counterpart. At a brief look, elemental damage can be further scaled in the endgame via 3 options. Number 1, Elemental Archon. This buff gives you 25% more damage across all elemental types. The condition to trigger is relatively easy via supports or notables, such as spending mana or igniting an enemy, and damage is substantial enough to be translated as an extra support gem, or even close to something like Eldritch Empowerment on the Lich Ascendancy without any downside. The upside is roughly 50% of the time, with 10-second duration and 20-second cooldown, which can be reduced further via lineage support gems such as Catal's Rejuvenation, but is more than sufficient to completely burn down a boss if you're also leveraging COC, as discussed before. One interesting thing to note is that from the wording of Archon buff, it suggests that other forms of Archon will be introduced later in the game as well. One can only hope that a Chaos variant is in the works. Number 2, Archmage is another obvious late game damage buff, especially if you build into elemental damage. The damage you gain here is extra lightning, which if you recall from our damage calculation, means that only builds investing into LE damage increase in the passive tree can fully take advantage of the scaling here. Additionally, if you're taking Eldritch Battery as a keystone and have acceptable gears, 3k mana is not difficult to obtain, and that already translates to another extra 120% lightning damage, which is very significant. Lastly, we also have Adonia's Ego Wand. There are more hoops to jump through here, but at the end of the day, you're able to receive up to 100 or even 135 more elemental damage if you invest properly into max power charge of up to 7 to 9 counts. Additionally, with notables such as Infusion of Power, you're able to stack up power charges almost instantaneously with Stormweaver Ascendancy and an efficient infusion spender such as Firestorm. Operator Otter's video also demonstrates this, that I will link in the description. So with all of that superior elemental damage package, what does Chaos have? Simply put, not much. Volatility comes to mind, but at its current state is very limited to Chonk due to the Ascendancy's ability to negate volatility detonation damage. Outside of Chonk, it's very hard to generate volatility in the first place unless you're building the crit, and the passives which gives you percent chance to generate volatility on kill is not relevant for bossing in most cases, which is when you honestly need the damage the most. Other Chaos packages, such as Chaos Attunement, is relevant for Chaos attack only, while comparable damage scalers such as Extraction or Event Horizon have significant downsides which requires additional investment to build around. All of this shows that late game Chaos damage simply does not have build diversity, nor comparable options to even start with in most cases, and requires serious commitment or even other engines to build around, which at this point I've not seen any very efficient solutions from the community. In conclusion, the previous section is not meant to be comprehensive, but I hope it paints enough of a picture to show the currently very limited state of Chaos spell archetype, outside of the quote-unquote intended way of playing via ED or Contagion. The simple fact that Chaos is the best damage type, as most monsters do not have Chaos resistance, simply does not compensate for all the limitations and issues we've discussed here, especially when things like Rocky Outer's Flow exist, or even just a more efficient LE weakness/exposure setup which then can completely negate the LE resistance of most monsters in the first place. Given the relatively poor state of pure Chaos spell builds, the second part of this video shows some ways to make this archetype somewhat viable if we're stubbornly committed in the name of build diversity. To start, Original Sin, Wither, and Yoke of Suffering are all still relevant, but with some key differences between that of an attack-based build and a spell-based build. Afterwards, I'll briefly talk about how to stack LE ailments with Chaos damage only, without any lineage support gems. Lastly, we'll touch on non-crit automation tools, as well as some Ascendancy choices. More details were included in the previous Maximizing Your Chaos Damage video, but TLDR, Original Sin is still the key starting point for any Chaos spell builds. Not only does it give you a significant source of Chaos by converting all your LE damage, it also unifies your damage to the Chaos type, so your Despair and Wither setup becomes much more effective. One point of note is that any damage gain as extra sources are calculated after Original Sin conversion, which means they will stay as elemental damage type and not receive the passive tree Chaos increase bonuses nor Wither or Despair synergies. Something to keep in mind given how much more prevalent this source of damage is for a spell-based archetype. Subsequently, Wither and Shock are just as, if not more potent on a spell-based build as it is on an attack-based build. As a reminder, both Wither and Shock are premium damage modifiers of the increased damage taken type, which is multiplicative to both increase-decrease and more/less modifiers. At max stack Wither, you're able to go up to 50% increased damage taken. When combined with Wither magnitude increase on the tree, as well as Wither magnitude increase source from Ruin tacked on a Darkness and Throne belt, treating sockets as gloves, you can actually increase your Wither magnitude up to 90%, which is very significant. Combining this with Stormweaver double shock stack, along with some other non-damage ailment magnitude increase, you can get up to a total of 190% increased damage taken, which is insanely valuable. Next, Yoke of Suffering still provides a significant damage boost when you build into ailment stacking, where rare amulets become much more competitive. In this case, the choice between a rare or YOS really becomes a trade-off of what your build is actually looking for. The key is simply that spell level scaling is much stronger than an attack level scaling. For further explanation, let's dive into a comparative flowchart. What is the best in slot amulet from a damage scaling perspective? Yoke of Suffering, or a rare amulet with +3 skills as well as T1 suffixes for crit chance and damage? For attack skills, YOS outskills a rare amulet when you have stacked at least 3 or more elemental ailments on the monster. For reference, there are 5 elemental ailments in total, such as Shock, Ignite, Freeze, Chill, and Electrocute. Looking at the calculation, I have provided 2 examples, one with Flicker Strike and another with Snipe. For YOS, most of the scaling happens towards the end of the calculation, down here, in the form of increased damage taken, which is multiplicative with both increase and more modifiers. On the rare amulet side, the scaling kicks in at the skill gem multiplier calculation step, as well as the crit calculation step down here. For both Flicker and Snipe case, you'll see that, assuming the same base damage, increase, and more multiplier, YOS outscales the rare amulet at 3 ailments or more. One key thing to note is that at +3 to attack skills, the skill gem multiplier scaling is roughly about 25%. This will be important when we talk about spell levels. Moving on then to spell-based builds, the key difference here is that spell level scaling is much more dramatic. Comparing to the previous 25% increase, a +3 to spell skill hovers around 44 to up to more than 50% in increase. In fact, YOS only outskills a rare amulet purely on the damage front when you have stacked 4 or more ailments on the enemy. This aggressive spell level scaling puts rare amulet in a much tighter competition to YOS, And whether you slot in YOS or a rare amulet now becomes a much more nuanced decision. Keep in mind that outside of damage, a rare amulet is a much better choice than YOS because of the additional affixes that can be rolled, such as Spirit, Defense, Mana for those of us who run EB or stack mana, as well as a host of other suffixes such as Recoup. TLDR, because YOS barely outscales rare amulet in damage, ailment stacking for further chaos scaling is now in fact not as palatable, or even as crucial as it was back for an attack-based chaos build. In fact, I can argue that just leaning into Original Sin and Wither, and speccing heavily into either mana scaling and regen via Indigen might even be a better way, provided you have the appropriate gears and key augments such as Quipolado's Thesis. All in all, it does look like ailment stacking is not as significant for a chaos spell build than that of an attack-based build. However, if we still want to lean into elemental ailment stacking, here is a way that I've been able to do so without using any lineage gem support. Number 1, for freeze buildup, we utilize a curse setup of Despair, but slotting in Decaying Hex and Chaotic Freeze. Decaying Hex adds a damage over time component to your Despair, in which then allows Chaotic Freeze to kick in, which essentially enables all other chaos damage that's dealt during the course of Decaying Hex to contribute to Freeze. Dodre's Undoing is simply something I'm also sliding into Despair for active mapping. For Shock, we are utilizing the relatively well-known Thunderstorm and Shock Conduction 2 and bypassing the need to build damage to trigger Shock entirely. TLDR, Thunderstorm allows all enemies in the active area to be considered drenched, and Shock Conduction 2 automatically shocks all drenched enemies. For Ignite, I've been able to automate Ember Fusillade on my Dueling Wand, which gives the automation skill Spell Slinger, and if you take Black Flame Covenant, this allows all fire damage to be converted to chaos, both in terms of fire hit and ignite. Lastly, for Chill, we also use something similar as we did in the attack build side, where we slot in Embitter to get actual cold damage even outside of Original Sin to contribute to Chill. For this option, there's a few different skills you can choose to do this, preferably on a skill that does not matter in terms of damage, because once you slot in Embitter, your cold damage portion will not receive benefit from any increased chaos damage nodes on the passive tree. For my build in particular, I vary Embitter slotting either into Frostwall or Living Bomb. Living Bomb would be for Fire Infusion generation for our payoff Comet skill later, or Frostwall because it has an intrinsic additional multiplier to freeze as well as chill buildup. Lastly, with all 4 elemental ailments stacked on the boss, we then automate Comet with Cast on Minion Death and Wolfpack, which we'll get into in a minute. So now we are back in our hideout, and I do want to show a cool spell automation trick that I'm actually not sure is going to stay for 0.5, but still good to know. So what you're seeing here is an example character without any significant gear equipped, but what I do have on the skill set side are Cast on Minion Death, Wolfpack, and Essence Drain. Essence Drain is more of a placeholder spell. You can, replace this with any other spell that you use when you're mapping or bossing. The important thing is that you want to make sure you stock it in Minion Pack 2. What this does is that it increases the damage output of your spell that this is socketed in at the cost that every time when you cast the spell, you will take life away from your minion, and that damage taken is based on your maximum life. So every time when I cast Essence Drain, I will deal damage to my own wolf pack, and right now I have 6 wolf pack, and my wolf health is such that when I cast Essence Drain once, I will just immediately kill a wolf. And when a wolf dies, then this adds energy into Cast on Minion Death, which allows me to trigger what I have socketed in here, which in this case is Comet. So if you look at the energy right now, I have about 51%. When I trigger, or when I cast Essence Drain once, I get up to 100% for 1 wolf death, and a Comet comes down. And I do another one, that's another 51%. So roughly right now, 2 wolf per Comet is what I have. Something like that. At this point, it looks like you might have to wait for your wolf to revive before you can do this again. Not really. You can actually preempt, or you can accelerate this revive mechanic by doing a weapon swap. This is the part that I'm not sure if it's intended or not, but right now that's how it works. So let me demonstrate this again. I'm going to cast Essence String 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Instead of wait for the timer, I'm going to weapon swap back, and my wolves are back, right? Even though this timer is still clicking. And then I can cast Essence String, again, for more comment. So one note, I did not come up with this trick. I think this was showcased earlier in this league with that popular Hammer of the God build from the Japanese YouTube creator when he was using this wolf pack cast on minion death to automate a part of his loop. And I also saw this from 787 Prada, YouTube creator, where he was using this to automate some kind of power charge generation or even kind of a similar setup for offense capabilities. But overall, it's kind of a really cool way to automate spell casting. And it's very flexible, meaning you can socket this into any build. The only trick to remember or keep in mind is that to, again, overcome the revive timer, you do want to make sure that wolf pack and cast on minion death is allocated to only one of your 2 weapon sets. If you keep wolf pack on both weapon sets, then you're gonna really have to wait for the 7-second timer before Mole Wolf respawn for your comment to trigger. Lastly, we can quickly talk about the different Ascendancies and see which one is best for this archetype. Of the 2 demos that I've tested between Lich and Stormweaver, Lich is definitely better in terms of damage. One caveat, however, is that some Lich damage engine, such as Price of Power, does not work with trigger spells. Alternatively, Chonk or Archetype Chayula can also be a viable option, but I have not tested that in this iteration of the video yet. For Stormweaver that you see here on the screen, I think the obvious pro that you get is this node right here, Strike Twice. This lets you essentially get 2 stack of shock. The base magnitude of shock is reduced, but with enough scaling, you can still kind of pull it up into a reasonable number, but you can stack 2 shocks. So in the Doriani tooltip that you saw, that was me running with Stormweaver, where each instance of shock we were able to get about 50%, so that's instantly an 100% increased damage taken just from shock, even without Wither. So that's a very significant damage boost that is relevant for the Chaos build. Additionally, you do have nodes such as Shaper of the Storm or even Shaper of Winter, where again, if you do not have Lineage Gem, you can definitely take these nodes and all of your Chaos damage will be able to contribute to one or even both of the elemental ailments. I did not take these because if you look at the way that we're kind of triggering elemental ailments for now, it's already easy enough without having to, I would say, kind of inefficiently spend your Ascendancy points. So I actually kind of pulled it over to Arcane Surge and Force of Will. This actually gives us pretty good mana regen, especially in the midst of combat. And because we are taking Eldritch Battery here, all of our ES goes into mana anyways. And I don't have any gear right now, so that's why my mana is pretty bad. But again, the idea here is everything goes into mana, and you are just kind of able to spam a lot of spells and kind of increase your survivability. The other thing about Stormweaver that makes things pretty convenient is that even though we are building into Chaos, we are still using elemental skills to do so and converting via Original Sin, which means we are still trapped in kind of the mechanics of needing to use infusions. Especially if you want to trigger Comet on cast on minion death, you will still need to generate fire infusion. Of course, you can do this with Living Bomb, but if you start thinking about other skills that you might need, for mapping, or if you look at the Mobalytics in terms of the example build that I have with Stormweaver, you also need, Cold Infusion or even Lightning Infusion, and just kind of this node, Refracting Infusion right here, really simplifies your life. Where you can really just focus on generating one type of infusion and you will have enough for most of the time all 3, and that really kind of opens up the kind of different skills that you want to use, because all elemental skills does chaos damage because of Original Sin, and then you really can kind of choose and pick whichever one you want and still kind of use all those elemental skills to the maximum efficiency. So those are kind of the few things that Stormweavers are great at in terms of building back into this Chaos archetype. So moving on from Stormweaver to Lich, we get actually a lot more great damage packages. If I come down and look at this, I can take Necromantic Conduit, which gives me Unholy Might, which is an automatic 30% of all damage gained as extra chaos. If I also come down here with Blackened Heart, I get 4% increased magnitude of Unholy Might per 100 maximum mana. So if I combine this set of Ascendancy with something like Eldritch Battery, which then converts all of my base energy shield to mana, and with respectable gears, I can get up to about 3.4k in mana, which translates roughly to about a 70% of extra damage gain as chaos, which is pretty significant. Additionally, even outside of that, I get more options to scale chaos damage, namely here with Price of Power, where I can consume power charge for more damage. The way that I generate power charge is via this notable right here, where every time when I consume an elemental infusion, I get a power charge. So the way to do this is actually by, slapping down Orb of Storm, or just kind of Living Bomb, or even rely on some Aspera skills such as Siphon Elements, because you're stacking elemental ailments anyways. Once you have enough infusions, you can spend it with something like Firestorm, which can actually consume 3 infusions at the same time, which then gives you 3 power charges for further use for your Comet. 2 quick annoying things about this is that number 1, Price of Power here does not seem to synergize with any cast on skills, meaning if I cast a Comet with cast on minion death, it's not going to eat the power charge for more damage. Second thing, this weird way of getting infusion, consuming infusion to get power charge, and then consuming power charge again, really makes the bossing rotation super complicated. I've been playing this Ascendancy version for about 5 to 10 hours, and I don't think I can make a build guide for it, just because the way that I do the bossing skill rotation is kind of stupid. Essentially, I would need to create enough infusion with Orb of Storm and Living Bomb, and then I would need to spend it with Firestorm to gain power charge, and then I would need to somehow do Living Bomb again to get more fire infusion, and then trigger Comet while the power charge is still there. And all that time, I still need to ensure that I have been stacking both Shock with Thunderstorm and Ember Fusillade with Withering Touch to make sure that the 90% Wither debuff and the Shock debuffs are up. So, the way that I do this timing, and again, not to mention if I'm running a Yoke of Suffering, I also need to make sure that the boss is frozen at the right time. So the whole thing is just kind of a mess, honestly. Even though there's a lot of options, but just to kind of manually do everything here rather than rely on something that automate, and also the lack of automation energy with this node just throws one too many wrenches in the cog, if you will. So, I'm sure if I play this optimally, or if an AI plays this, I guess, it's going to be a lot more efficient, and I can burn down the boss a lot quicker than 30 to 40 seconds as advertised in this video. Lastly, I can also take things like Rupture to Soul, which if I'm running Blasphemy or if I'm using Despair as a damage skill, it just makes mapping a lot easier. Alternatively, I can also spec into Crystalline's Phylactery. One issue is just that I don't have any ES to start with because I'm taking EB to scale Blackened Heart, which means that by default, I'm just going to have 50% more mana cost, which is actually pretty significant if you're using your mana pool as a way of health, as well as obviously spending it for spells. So one last Ascendancy I still want to mention, even though we did use this Ascendancy for the attack-based Chaos build, I think, Chonk or Acolyte of Chayula still actually has a lot of potential for a Chaos-based spell build. Just because a lot of, the nodes that you get, is synergistic with either, right? So for example, Waking Dream and Choice of Power is still relevant. Doesn't matter if you're doing attack-based build or spell-based build. And in fact, even the small nodes like Skill Speed is relevant for both spell and attack speed, right? The other thing is now you actually are able to build into volatility to kind of offset the lack of the chaos damage packages that we have on the spell-based side, right, with Inner Turmoil. Then all you really have to do is think about which skill you need to slot in Catharsis to detonate your chaos stack right before you go into the boss stage, right? So, and you still have, Grasp of the Void or, other like shenanigans that you can do with Chonk. So, and also the starting point is not that far away from that of a, Lich or Stormweaver. So you can still probably do most of the similar nodes that we have for the spell-based side and get even, the infusions or the Price of Power or stuff like that if you want to do something with power charge. So, even though I did not test Chonk on the Chaos spell build, I still think it's a pretty viable option. So, in conclusion, while a pure Chaos spell build is still able to clear T60 maps and most endgame contents, and obvious power ceiling exists, especially when compared to other spell builds that leverage elemental damage or crits. With all else being equal, I really hope this video communicates clearly why spell builds are harder to optimize than attack builds, assuming we only focus on chaos scaling. Additionally, I hope my overview here also helps communicate the rather limited build diversity situation I've encountered when tinkering with spell builds in 0.4, and something that GGG will address going into the future, especially our upcoming giant 0.5 patch. Apologies that this video has taken a little bit longer than expected, given my tinkering. And again, if any of the conclusion here is overlooking any crucial aspects, again, given that this is my first time seriously speccing into spell builds, please let me know in the comments and I can kind of improve or make adjustments or make corrections. Finally, I'll still be keeping an eye out on this chaos spell archetype going forward. Two more aspects I feel that I didn't tinker enough. Number one is actually cast on elemental ailment for bossing for spell automation. And the second is I'm actually missing some crucial uniques in my standard league that I feel can bring a lot more flavor to the builds, such as Palm of the Dreamer and Quidolopos Thesis. Good news is that I've actually already farmed up those uniques, the Augment as well as the Scepter, on my league side. So once migration happens in 0.5, I'll definitely be able to revisit this archetype in the future, combined with hopefully some much needed rework. So finally, thank you very much again if you made it this far in the video, and I'm very excited to see what new changes are in store in 0.5 for us to keep tinkering and making new builds. Until next time, cheers!